Well, hey everybody, welcome to Hope Fellowship. My name is Eric Sebastian. I'm our campus pastor at our McKinney campus and our lead grow pastor here at Hope Fellowship. I want to welcome everybody that's watching online right now. Everybody that's at our campuses, Prosper Campus, Frisco West Campus, McKinney Campus. Everybody here at Frisco East, how are we doing today? Great. Doing good, there we go. However you're watching, we're glad that you are. We are in week 3 of a series we've been in called Under Pressure. Before we kind of jump into that, a lot of us have been able to live out this idea of under pressure over the last week with the recent storms that have come through and the weather. We know, even many of us watching and present in this room and at our campuses and watching online, you felt the devastation and the impact of the weather that just swept through our area. And one of the things that's been kind of neat over the last week, if you can even say that, has just been seeing the people of God be the hands and feet of Jesus in the middle of disaster. And seeing whether it's on Facebook or just through text or communications or these kind of things, seeing people at Hope Fellowship, lending loaves of bread to their neighbors or firewood or helping meet needs, even in the middle of maybe their own personal disaster or their own stuff, but reaching out and loving their neighbor. And obviously a very godly characteristic, the heartbeat of our pastor here at Hope. And so we wanted to not just get behind that at the people level, but also at the organizational level. And we say this all the time at Hope, you're not giving to us, you're giving through us. And a lot of what you're giving through is going to local organizations, local food banks and local nonprofits here in our area, in like Collin County area and surrounding areas, that's helping meet the needs for people in this area. And some of these specific nonprofits and some of these specific food banks have been devastated this past week. And so we wanted to do something about it. And so one of the things we're doing is you can go to hopefellowship.net/give and you can donate there. You can go to, there's a drop-down menu, you can hit 2021 Storm Relief Fund. And these funds are going to help the helpers in our area, to help some specific nonprofits in our area who've had major devastation over the past week. Or you can text any amount and the word storm to 84321. And I would encourage you too, whether you give something, a big gift, a small gift, whatever, that as you're kind of thinking through that or hearing this for the first time, that you just pray. God, whatever I'm able to give, would you use this? Would you use this to help some of the helpers in our area, to help some of these nonprofits and these food banks in our area? And God, would you do more with what I have than what we could even think or imagine? Is that good? Good here? Good online? Good watching other campuses? Okay, we've been in this series Under Pressure. And this is week 3 of this series. And we've kind of, if this is your first time watching, then we're going to do a quick recap. If you've been with us the last couple weeks, and this is old news for you, but for those of us maybe your first time watching or first time joining, kind of where we've been before we go to where we're going. Week 1, Pastor John talked about walking in relational pain, and we looked at the life of Elijah. And if you remember this, he introduced us to the triangle, the relational pain triangle. And he said a lot of times when we're experiencing relational pain, we'll kind of default to these feelings, right? To anger, to victim, to fear. And he said, and he kind of, at the end, he had all these bubbles, right? All the circles at the end. He said, if anything else is in the middle of this, it's not going to work. God has to be in the center. And if God's in the center, it doesn't mean that we're not going to experience relational pain. That relational pain is an inevitability. But when God's at the center, it means God is in control and God is walking with us and walking us through relational pain. We got to last week, we talked about walking in relational patience. We looked at the life of Joseph, one of my favorite Bible characters. And John told us last week, patience really was all about perspective. And perspective does a couple things. Perspective says that God can use my pain for good. It says that God is working even when I can't see it. And then it says that it's not all about me. And we saw this play out through the life and the story of Joseph, which leads us to this week, week 3. We're going to be talking about walking in relational purpose. And we're going to look at the friendship between David and Jonathan. David may be a character that a lot of us are familiar with. Jonathan may be a little more obscure, I don't know. But I really believe this, that from this friendship that we're going to study today, there's going to come a principle that no matter where you are in life today, it relates to every single relationship that you're in. Every relationship. And if you have some relationships that are under pressure right now, maybe you're experiencing some relational pain with someone right now, or maybe you're in need of some relational patience or some relational perspective. I truly believe that this principle is going to be a powerful healing principle to help us find and walk in purpose in these relationships. And so we're going to look at these two friends, David and Jonathan. And this is probably the most famous friendship in all of biblical history. And it's also just power-packed with all sorts of drama and intrigue. And as we're going to uncover, a lot of pressure. And so right from the jump, though, we need to know there's kind of three main players. There's three main characters in the story. Number one, there's Saul. And Saul is the king of Israel, the first king of Israel. And then Saul has a son, Jonathan. Jonathan is Saul's son, and the rightful heir to the throne. He's next in line. He's the son. He's the oldest. He's next in line to be king. And then we're going to meet David. And David is God's newly anointed and newly appointed next king of Israel. You can already see where this story is going to have some relational pain and some relational turbulence, because we got a king, we have a son who's rightfully next in line to be king, but then God makes a decision, God makes a choice, and now someone else is going to be king. And we've got all sorts of drama, we've got all sorts of intrigue. There's no way, I need to just say this from the very beginning, there's no way that I'm going to be able to communicate and articulate all of the suspense and all of the intrigue and all of the storyline that's happening inside of this text. We're going to be in 1 Samuel today. And really starting in chapter 8, the nation of Israel says, God, we want a king. Like, you're great up there, but we want somebody down here. And so Samuel, the prophet of God, goes to the house of Saul, and he anoints Saul to be the first king of Israel. And so Saul finds himself all throughout 1 Samuel in all sorts of opportunities to make decisions, and he finds himself in pressure-packed moments. And it seems like every time Saul has to make a decision, he makes the wrong decision. Like, we're supposed to go right, Saul says we're going left. We're supposed to go down, Saul says we're going up. And he finds himself in these pressure moments, and he keeps doing the wrong thing, and eventually so much so to where God says, okay, we're going to redirect, and I'm going to move this from the house of Saul to the house of David. And then David steps into the picture in 1 Samuel. And many of us are familiar with David. And David is this young shepherd boy, right? And he shows up on the scene, and then he defeats Goliath, which maybe a lot of us are familiar with that story. And he defeats Goliath, and then all the way to the end of 1 Samuel, the very last chapter, chapter 31, Saul and Jonathan are dead, and David becomes king. Whether you're a Christ follower or not, I would just encourage you to read 1 Samuel. It's 31 chapters. Maybe take the month of March and read through it or something. There's just so much drama. It's such a captivating book of the Bible. There's so much storyline, there's so much emotion, there's betrayal, there's deceit, but then there's loyalty, and there's friendship, and there's love. And kind of at the middle, like at the epicenter of this whole book, is this incredible relationship, this incredible friendship between Jonathan and David. And they're like two people who should never be friends, they should never be together, but yet somehow they are, and it works. They're like the biblical version of, like the Mandalorian and Grogu. You guys know what I'm talking about? It's like, this shouldn't work, but yet somehow it does, and I can't stop watching. It's magic on screen, right? And so much so to where at the end of Jonathan's life, Jonathan has just died, and news has gotten to David. And David finds out that Jonathan, his best friend, has just passed. And David would say this about his best friend, Jonathan. Oh, my dear brother, Jonathan, I am crushed by your death. Your friendship was a miracle wonder, a love far exceeding anything that I've known or ever hope to know. And Jonathan, he's got it made in the shade. I mean, Jonathan is like the most eligible bachelor in all of Israel, okay? Like, he's the king's oldest. He's the king's favored. He is next in line to be the king. Jonathan has heard most of his life, okay, now, Jonathan, now when you're king, then this and this and this. Okay, now, Jonathan, and one day you're going to be king, and then when you're king, you're going to need to do these things. And one day you need to be prepared now, because one day you're going to be king. In fact, there's this incredible story in the middle of 1 Samuel that Jonathan is riding into town, and he's on the back of this elephant. And as he comes into the city gates, he stands up and he starts going, oh, I just can't wait to be. No, okay, I'm just kidding. That doesn't happen. I made that part up. That's a different king altogether. That's everything the light touches is yours. That's a whole nother thing. So Jonathan, though, Jonathan has grown up being prepared to be the king. And Jonathan knows what his future holds. His future is power. His future is wealth. His future is kingdom. And Jonathan, he's got it made. And then to make matters a little bit worse, though, for Jonathan, now all of a sudden this guy David comes onto the scene. And David is this young shepherd boy who comes from the wrong family, who comes from nothing. His daddy didn't even think enough of him to bring him to the table to be anointed king when Samuel shows up. And all of a sudden, David has fought Goliath. And all of a sudden, everything is starting to change for David and for Jonathan. And David shows up on the scene, and the Israelite army and the Philistines are in battle all throughout the book of 1 Samuel. And Goliath is standing there and he's like, if you want some, come and get some. Anybody? Does anybody want to dance? Anybody want to dance with Goliath? And the nation of Israel, the army of Israel is like, nah, we're good. We're good. Nobody here knows how to dance. We don't want any part of Goliath, okay? And David shows up, some teenage shepherd boy, no armor, no sword, no nothing, a couple of rocks and a slingshot, and he's like, let's go. Fearless, knocks down Goliath. And in that moment, the favor of God starts to shift from the house of Saul to the house of David. And in this moment, the allegiance and the loyalty and the honor of the army of Israel starts to shift from the house of Saul to the house of David. And in this moment, all of the nation of Israel, their loyalty, their praise starts to shift from the house of Saul to the house of David. And now we're starting to find out that just one chapter ahead of David defeating Goliath, Samuel has showed up to David's house. And he's anointed David to be the next king of Israel. He's defeated Goliath. He's been anointed and appointed to be the next king. And Jonathan has every reason in the world to hate David. Jonathan has every reason in the world to resent David, every reason in the world to kind of fear David a little bit. From a practical standpoint, David has just robbed Jonathan of everything he's ever lived for. He's robbed him of his future. He's robbed Jonathan of his life. He's rained on his parade. He's crashed the party. Everything Jonathan had hoped and prepared to be, David now was. And all because of this one guy, all because of this one decision that God made, Jonathan's life would be completely different. Jonathan has every reason in the world to hate David, and yet, in a shocking turn of events, we see Jonathan do the exact opposite. We see Jonathan pursue a relationship with David. And we are going to find out in Scripture here in just a minute that they become the best of friends, even in spite of pressure-packed situations. And Jonathan, he takes the pain of the relationship and the sting of a relationship. You took what was rightfully mine, week 1. And he puts it in proper perspective, and he surrenders it to the Lord, week 2. And we find out today that he walks in freedom, and he walks in purpose, and he walks in covenant relationship with David, week 3. The very guy who unfairly stole everything that belonged to Jonathan. And here's where this story kind of intersects with us. For us, because there are people in our lives that have hurt us, right? There's people in our lives that they did this to us, or they did that to us, or we didn't like what they said, or we didn't like what they did, or God, how come they got to do that, and then this was their reward, and then I did this, and then I got that? How come I was praying for this, and I didn't get it, but they weren't even praying for it, and they got it? God, how come this? How come I made the decision, I did the thing, but then they took the credit for it? And so on and so forth. And this keeps on going. And we've got so many wedges in relationships and so much division and distance in relationships, and the circumstances, they don't even compare to what Jonathan is facing. And yet somehow, some way, Jonathan, he knows something, or he hears something, or he believes something so much that it revolutionizes his perspective, that he would be able to pursue a relationship and a friendship with the man who took everything that rightfully belonged to him. And Jonathan is able to find purpose in the pain and the pressure of his situation. And we start to see this unfold in 1 Samuel chapter 18. In the first 4 verses, it says this. It says, after David had finished talking with Saul, so David has just defeated Goliath, Saul says, hey, I want to talk to him. So they have this conversation. Right after that, David met Jonathan, the king's son. And there was an immediate bond between them, for Jonathan loved David. And from that day on, Saul kept David with him and wouldn't let him return home. And Jonathan made a solemn pact with David because he loved him as he loved himself. And Jonathan sealed the pact by taking off his robe and giving it to David, together with his tunic, sword, bow, and belt. There's powerful imagery that's taking place here. They make this covenant, which you rarely see in the Old Testament at the friendship level. And what Jonathan is saying to David, he's saying, I'm giving you everything that is mine. Okay, everything that I have, David, is yours. And then did you notice he says he gave him his bow and he gave him his sword. The things that Jonathan used to protect himself and to defend himself with. He's saying, David, I'm pledging my protection to you unconditionally. Now, I will spend the rest of my life, I will spend all of my days not fighting with you, but I'll be fighting for you. And in essence, what Jonathan is saying with this act is he's saying, David, all that I have, all that I am is yours. And he's saying it to the guy who unfairly just derailed his entire life and took everything from him. I mean, don't you think Jonathan could have gone to God? He could have been asking God, like, God, why is this happening to me? Okay, God, like, I know my dad is messed up. Okay, I know he keeps making mistakes under pressure, but because of his mistakes, does that mean that I can't be king any longer? Like, I understand you have to take the kingdom away from him, but why do you have to take the kingdom away from me? Why do I have to suffer because of what my dad did? Why am I paying the consequences of something that someone else did? Like, can't I still be king? Why are you going to take the kingdom from me? You're going to give it to some harp-playing shepherd boy? Right? I mean, Jonathan has every reason in the world, just like you and I do, to say, okay, I'm going to allow some wedges. I'm going to create some divisions between me and the people in my life. And yet somehow, some way, Jonathan avoids these traps. And here's how this sounds in our world. Here's things that we say. We say, maybe you didn't get your fair share in the deal, and so now you're upset. Or maybe you saw on Facebook that they moved into a bigger house, and you're like, I'm kind of jealous. I'd like a bigger house. Or maybe he or she, they kept getting promoted, and you've just kind of stayed the same in the company. Or maybe he or she, they weren't pulling their weight in the relationship, and so finally you're like, I'm done. I'm out. Or maybe for some of you, you're seeing that they're getting answers to prayers that you have been praying. And you're like, God, this is unfair. And do you know what this boils down to for us? Every single one of us watching at every campus right here, myself included, it boils down to this reality of us saying, God, I want to be king. I want to be king, and I don't want anybody looking twice at my crown, okay? I want to be king, and I don't like anybody that's cutting in on my territory. Okay, I want to be king, and if they try to cut in on my kingdom, then we're going to have a problem. We're not going to be able to have much of a relationship, okay? Because now all of a sudden pride is starting to well up inside of us, and it comes in and maybe subtly at first. And there's so much culture that is indoctrinating how we think and how we're motivated and how we respond. And now culture is telling us things like, yeah, you should be king. You are king of your castle. You need to get what is yours, okay? Everything that you are owed, you deserve, so you should go and get it. You should go and get it, and if somebody isn't treating you fairly, life is meant to be fair, and if you're not being treated fairly, you should go and rectify that situation, and you should take care of that situation to make sure you're getting what you deserve. And we're like, we like this mindset, and this mindset feeds us a little bit. And now all of a sudden, if you start to come in and you start to threaten that mindset with me, well, now it's going to be nearly impossible for us to have any sort of context or any sort of relationship because the pride inside of me has poisoned the well of the relationship that we're trying to both drink from. And we see this play out with King Saul. We see Saul walk this out. Saul finds out that Jonathan, just like Jonathan's sisters, is starting to side with David. And Saul is starting to be threatened by David. His kingdom is starting to be threatened by David. And he's realizing that the hand of God is moving from his house to the house of David. And so Jonathan and Saul, they have a conversation. And they have this talk in 1 Samuel, just 2 chapters later in chapter 20. And Saul's talking to his son, and he says this. It says, Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan. And he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman. All right, hold up. How many of you, don't raise your hands, don't out yourself, okay? How many of you, however you're watching, you've ever had that conversation with your spouse and it sounded something like this? Do you know what your kid just did? Do you know what your kid just said to me? No, they're my kid when they make straight A's, okay? They're my kid when they hit the home run, okay? But do you know what your kid just did? You son of a perverse and rebellious woman. He says, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse, which is David, to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you. And as long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. He says, now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. Strong words from the most powerful man in all of Israel. And Saul's looking at the big picture. And he's looking at Jonathan and he's like, hello, McFly, do you get it? Do you understand what's going on? The longer that David hangs around, the less likely you are to be king. The longer he hangs around, he's going to take what is rightfully yours. So not only do I not want you hanging out with him any longer, not only do I not want you bringing him around the house any longer, not only do I not want you bringing him around your sisters any longer, no. I want you to bring him to me. And I'll take care of this situation once and for all. Like I said earlier, there's no way that I can articulate and communicate all of the stuff that's happening inside of 1 Samuel. All of the drama and all the storyline that Saul sees everything that he's worked for and everything that he's rightfully wanted to hand off to his son and give to his son. And he sees it's about to be ripped away by some harp-playing shepherd boy who comes from the wrong family. And Saul can't figure out, Jonathan, why won't you come to terms with this? Why won't you play ball? Why won't you come to my side and realize that this guy is a threat and we got to take him out? And it's not that Jonathan is neutral to the whole thing. Jonathan goes the complete opposite. He's like, Dad, not only am I not going to do that, I'm going to make a covenant with David. I'm going to pledge my undying loyalty and protection to him. I'm going to walk and I'm going to pursue a relationship with David, the guy who unfairly has stolen everything that was rightfully mine. So we have to be asking ourselves, like there's a question here that all of us, however you're watching, it's like, what is happening here? The question is this: what did Jonathan know that we don't know? Like, what in the world is going on inside of the mind of Jonathan that could allow him to respond in such a way? And I love it because we find this answer inside of the text of Scripture. Because in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, Saul and Jonathan have a conversation. But just a couple of verses before that conversation, in 1 Samuel chapter 20, verses 13 and 17, Jonathan has another conversation. He has this conversation with David. And their conversation sounds like this. Jonathan says, "But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace." And this is where it gets so good. "May the Lord be with you, David, as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed, and do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." He says, so Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because Jonathan loved David just like he loved himself. What's the principle? Well, what does Jonathan know that we don't know? It's this: that Jonathan recognized and surrendered to the fact that God had chosen David as the king. That sovereign God made a choice. That sovereign God made a decision. And so because God made a decision, now Jonathan had a decision to make. Okay, I can follow in the footsteps of my father, and I can walk in relational pain with David for the rest of my life. Or I can humbly surrender myself and not just accept it, perspective, but now how can I commit myself 100% to make sure that God's decision becomes a reality? And I can move into walking in relational purpose. And so Jonathan makes a covenant with David. Listen, not because David deserved to be king, but because sovereign God made a choice. The issue was that God decided, sovereign God made the choice. And Jonathan said, okay, he could have pitched a fit. I mean, he could have kicked and screamed and gone to God and said, "God, this is so unfair. This doesn't make any sense. Like, you're going to move the kingdom from my family. You're going to remove the kingdom from me, and you're going to give it to David, this guy, this shepherd boy who comes from the wrong family, the wrong town. He knows nothing about being king. He hasn't prepared. He hasn't equipped. He hasn't trained. He hasn't spent his life preparing to be the king." And in other words, he could have put all of the focus on David. He could have put all the focus completely on David and gotten to the exact same conclusion that his father got to. But see, for Jonathan, it wasn't all about David. It wasn't about David's character. It wasn't about what David deserved or what David didn't deserve. The issue wasn't with David. The issue was simply this. Sovereign God had made a choice. And Jonathan was wise enough to realize, okay, so now my responsibility, because God has made a choice, now how do I surrender to the choice that God has made? How is the king's son who has lived his entire life waiting and training to be king, how is he supposed to respond if he knows he has a sovereign God, faithful God who has sovereignly chosen that someone else should be king? Not how is he supposed to respond when somebody else takes his place? That's the wrong question. No, how is the king's son supposed to respond when the king, God, the king, has chosen that someone else will be king? And we see Jonathan decides that the best response was to go along with the king and to do everything he could to make sure that the king's decision became a reality. In essence, Jonathan decides to put the kingdom ahead of being king. You could say Jonathan decided to put the king ahead of his desire to be king. Man, what a fascinating story when you jump into this. And can I tell you how it ends for Jonathan? This is like the wah-wah part. There's no happy ending. Jonathan's life is completely ruined. Jonathan dies in an obscure place, in an obscure battle that quite literally amounts to nothing. And by chance, a Philistine soldier kills him on the battleground in the very last chapter of 1 Samuel. And he dies on the battleground right next to his father. But don't miss this. Jonathan died. Listen, Jonathan died having surrendered himself to the choice of the king. And he told David, my life, my protection, everything I have is completely yours. And now here's how this principle, it weaves its way into all of our lives. Because listen, for you, God has made some decisions about your life. For me, God has made some decisions about my life. And in the midst of those decisions, I've got one hand on the throne saying, but God, I want to be king. God, this isn't fair. God, just let me fix this. Let me rectify the situation. Let me take control. Let me put the crown on and let me do this. And God is saying, no, I've made some decisions for you. I've made some choices for your life. And we might think they're unfair. There might be some people who are smarter than us. There might be some people who are more talented than us. There might be some people who are better critical thinkers than us. There might be some people who are maybe, whatever. They are, richer than us. Whatever. God has made all sorts of decisions, all sorts of choices that impact our lives every day. And then do you know what else God has gone and done? God has decided to give us freedom. And we really don't like this because now you're exercising your freedom and your freedom bumps into me and we don't really like that. And your freedom gets on my nerves sometimes. And your freedom, it threatens me sometimes. And your freedom hurts me sometimes. And your freedom, it bothers me sometimes. And then you do things and they remind me that I'm not achieving my goals as quickly as I should be or as quickly as you are. Or maybe now I'm starting to realize that, wait a minute, you're getting things that I should be getting. You're getting answers to prayers that I've been praying. And we go to God and we're like, God, this doesn't make sense. You know what, God, this is God's choice. God's chosen to give freedom. And then we use our freedoms. And God doesn't stop it. Or he doesn't block it. Or he doesn't change it. Or he doesn't fix it for us. And it puts us in a dilemma. It puts us in an uncomfortable space. It puts us inside of relational pain. And it puts us inside of struggle. And we're like, I don't like this. And we have a decision to make. Are we going to spend the rest of our lives creating wedges and creating divisions between us and the people that we're in relationship with? Because you didn't do this thing that you were supposed to do, or you were supposed to say this and you said that, or because you were supposed to get this and yet you got that, and I'm stuck getting this. Or are we willing, like Jonathan? Could we, like Jonathan, respond, stand back, and look to God? And say, God, I realize that nothing comes into my life that you don't allow. And so I see this as a part of your sovereign choosing for me, and so I surrender to your choice for my life. This kind of humility, it frees us to find purpose even under the pressure of relationships. This kind of humility, it gives us perspective in the pain of relationships, and it allows us to put kingdom ahead of being king. How? Why? Because our confidence is not in the person or the situation that we're in relational pressure with, that we're in relational pain with. No, our confidence is in the character of God. And the Bible tells me that God is faithful. And it teaches me that God is omnipresent and that God is all-knowing and that God loves me and that God is walking with me. And so if God is that way, then no matter what David does or no matter what you do, I don't have to respond in like kind because my confidence is not in you and my confidence is not in your character. No, my confidence is in God. And so now whatever you choose to do or not do, I realize is ultimately from the hand of God. Because why? Because God has allowed it into my life. And so our challenge is it's not to act a certain way or to respond in like kind or to manipulate the situation so that we can get our way or to force my kingdom into your life or to get you out of my kingdom altogether. Now, our response is to simply ask the same question that Jonathan asked. Okay, God, in light of all of these circumstances, in light of this relationship, in light of this situation that is going on around me, and in light of the truth that I have a sovereign God who is king, who has allowed this into my life and yet is faithful and loves me and walks with me, how should I respond to your choice for me at this time? God, how should I respond? How should I respond to your choice for me right now? Knowing the situation I'm in, but also knowing your faithfulness. Or we could respond like Saul. Saul, who died an angry, bitter, hysterical man because he spent so much of his life, arguing with God and fighting with God about a decision that God had already made. It's like, the parent when they tell their kid, you can either clean your room with a consequence or without a consequence. But either way, you're what? You're cleaning this room. Okay, this room is getting cleaned today. You can do it the easy way or the hard way, but either way, this room's getting cleaned. The decision has already been made. The decision has been made. Now, you're cleaning your room either way. Now, how do you want to do it? And Jesus, listen, church, Jesus is our King. And as our King, he's made some decisions about you, and he's made some decisions about me. He's made some decisions. We can either clean our room with a consequence or clean our room without a consequence, but either way, we're cleaning our room. And we can look like Saul. We can kick and scream and fight and punch our way and say, no, I don't want to respond like this. And we're going to miss the opportunity to find God's purpose in situations and in relationships that are in our lives. Or we could respond like we see Jonathan. God, this was not my idea. This is not how I drew this up. If I was king, I would not do it this way. This is taking me by surprise. However, I trust you. I trust you. So now how can I make this the reality? Listen, even if it's everything opposite of what I want. So a challenge for us today, as this passage has wrecked me lately, is that you and I would look at every relationship around us, every relationship that we're in, especially those that have potential wedges because they're not fair. And when we ask ourselves, okay, how does someone in my circumstance, how does someone in my situation respond when they know they have a loving Heavenly Father who is King? That we would learn from Jonathan and that we would become more like Jesus, who under the most intense pressure, who under the most intense circumstance, was able to look to the Father and say, God, I'm going to walk your plan, your purpose out. Forgive them. It's not about them. They don't know what they're doing. It's not about me and them. It's about carrying out your plan for them. So how can I walk in relational purpose? And we would be able to say a prayer, God, when we're in these situations, God, these unfair choices, these unfair decisions were filtered through your divine providence and love for me. So therefore, I am trusting and responding to your character, not theirs. So not my will, God, but yours be done. Because what do we know? We know now that it's not about us versus them. It's not about your situation versus my situation. It's about us surrendering to the fact that we have a king. And our king has made some decisions for us. He's made some decisions about our lives. And so we put kingdom ahead of being king. We put the king ahead of our desire to be king. I thought maybe there would be no better way for us to kind of wrap this whole thought up today of walking in relational purpose than for us to pray a prayer together. Across this campus, all of our campuses watching, everybody watching online, that we would pray. There's a 3-sentence prayer that hopefully just kind of embodies the spirit of this message today. And wherever you're at, wherever you're watching, that we would pray this prayer together. Let's pray. Father, this didn't take you by surprise. I trust you. I accept your choice for me. Amen.